What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. Welcome to Splash City. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe. Did you know that 95% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed? That's a really high number. I'd like to get that one down a little bit. So if you've been around the channel for a while, you like the type of content that I produce, please consider hitting that subscribe button down below. It would help me out a lot. With all that said, let's get into today's video, and that is the Atlanta Hawks and their offseason plans. This is a team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals pretty unexpectedly. You know, they had a season where they started off really slowly, and then they made a coaching change, and all of a sudden things clicked for them. They went on this big run late in the year. Obviously, the playoff run was incredible. Trae Young was amazing down the stretch of the season, and they ultimately lose to the eventual NBA champions, the Milwaukee Bucks. So nothing at all to be ashamed about for the Hawks this past year. It was a great, successful season for them, and you know, everybody's already looking forward for them getting back on the court next year. They do have some moves to make, though. You know, a couple of key free agents that they have to deal with, and we'll see if they can basically run the same team back next year or what the plan's going to be for them. So let's take a look at the cap sheet. So here's the cap sheet. This is a team that you know, has some extensions to work on for some of their younger players, but most of the veterans are under contract here. You know, they're going to have a little bit of cap space to work with. They've only committed $93 million for next season on the books. A lot of the space will be eaten up by a John Collins extension. You know, if he does return, re-signing John Collins is likely going to eat up most of the cap space. They might still have a little bit to work with, but not a ton. So let's go over this player by player here. Gallinari making about $20 million next season. He was a good piece for them. You know, he is 32 years old, kind of getting up there in age, but he was a little bit inconsistent at points this year, but you know, ultimately proved to be a good signing and worthy of the money they gave him. I think that he's going to, you know, be just as good next season as he was this past year. He's, you know, might slow down just a little bit, but I still think he's a nice piece for this team. You know, he spaces the floor for them, is able to score different points on the floor and help take some of the pressure off Trae Young. So I do like Gallinari. I expect him to be back with the team next year. Bogdanovic also under contract for a couple more seasons. I fully expect him to be back as well. There were a couple of trade rumors for him, you know, mid-season, potentially some teams making an offer for him, but I don't think the Hawks ever really wanted to move him. It was more just rumors of other teams calling to try to get him, you know, get him traded. But nothing's going to happen there, I don't think, and I would expect him to be back with the team. You know, 3 more years, all at exactly $18 million, player option on the final. So, you know, I expect him to be back with the team. He's a really good player and a good fit for them. Clint Capella is also here. It's a really good deal for Clint Capella, you know, $17-18 million a season. I think that's well worth it for a player of his caliber. He showed what he can do throughout this run that they had this year. He's good defensively, you know, good pick and roll partner for Trae Young, catching lobs, all that good stuff for Capella. I fully expect him back with the roster next year. It's a very fair contract for what he provides for you, and I think he's a good player and he's a good fit. So, you know, like I said, these 3 guys at the top of this roster, all under contract for the next couple of years, and they're all, you know, very fair value and all good players for the Hawks. So I don't really think they need to make any moves involving these 3 guys, even though they're all kind of making a lot of money. I don't feel like they need to really explore any trade options with those 3. You have Tony Snell and Lou Williams both coming off the books there. Snell is, you know, he just turned in, I believe it was a 50-50-90 season. He didn't have like enough attempts to qualify for, you know, an official 50-40-90, but he shot like over 50% from 3 on like a decent number of tries. It wasn't like a ton of attempts, but, you know, he was hitting his shots, right? So Tony Snell, would not be surprised to see him back on a minimum. He's a decent role player, you know, can play a little bit for you. And like I said, the shooting numbers speak for themselves. He's not like the best shooter, and the attempts are not out of the world, but he's clearly, you know, good at it and serviceable enough to be able to hit 55% of his attempts on the season, even if there weren't a ton of them. So I would expect him back, you know, maybe on a minimum or somewhere else on a minimum potentially, but I do think he's done enough to stay in the league right now. Lou Williams, you know, making $8 million this season, expiring. He had hinted that he might consider retirement when he was traded to the Hawks, but he ended up playing, and it seemed like he really enjoyed his time there. You know, he made I believe it was an Instagram post kind of talking about how thankful he was for the opportunity from Atlanta, and hinted at maybe a return next year. So I would not be shocked to see Lou Williams back on maybe, you know, a mid-level deal. Maybe it's an exception if he just wants to play, or maybe a minimum if he just wants to play 1 more year and then maybe retire after that. So I would not be surprised for a sort of a retirement tour for Lou Williams, 1 more season for him. What kind of number that's on, I'm not sure. They might reward him and, you know, give him a decent contract if they can, but you know, I would expect probably 1 more year out of Lou Williams before retirement. Up next are all the young guys. DeAndre Hunter, they missed him in the playoffs. Only 23 years old, made a lot of progress in his second season after being drafted so highly. And wasn't that good his rookie year, but I think his sophomore season, like I said, made a lot of improvements upon his game. So I would expect him back next season. Hopefully he's healthy. Had to have, I think it was a meniscus that'll keep him out, for most of this offseason. So not a ton of time for him to, make some improvements on his game during the offseason, but I expect he'll be back next year. And guy with a really high ceiling defensively, and his offensive game is coming along. So I like DeAndre Hunter a lot. Trae Young is eligible for a rookie max extension, and I think he will get it. They're going to lock him up, sign him for the next 4 or 5 seasons on that max rookie contract. So good for Trae Young. He deserves it. He's worked really hard to get to this point where he's at in the NBA, and a lot of people are we're hating on Trae Young before the playoff run that he had and kind of being like, oh, he's overrated, oh, good stats, bad team guy, oh, he's not that good, blah blah blah. But he really proved a lot that he's able to be the leader of a team like this and be really good at only 22 years old. I remember, this is funny, but Trae Young, when he was a rookie, his first summer league, they played a summer league at the Utah Jazz. The Jazz host that summer league every year with like four or 5 teams every single time, and the Hawks were one of them that year, right? And so I got to watch Trae Young in person, his very first summer league game in the NBA, and he was horrible that game. He was so bad. He scored maybe 2, maybe 4 points on 1 for 10 shooting or something like that. He was getting blocked in the lane. He was turning the ball over, just an absolutely horrible showing for Trae Young. And I remember a lot of people were really bagging on him, saying, I knew this guy was going to be a bust. He shouldn't have been drafted so high, and this kid's not going to be any good. But it's crazy to watch how far he's come since then. I know it's just summer league, and obviously your first game you're not going to be that good, but people were so quick and so ready to just rag on Trae Young the instant he stepped into the NBA, and he has done nothing but prove people wrong. So full max extension is fully expected for Trae Young, and I'm happy for him because he deserves it. Onyeka Okongwu, unfortunately, we got the news the other day that he is going to have shoulder surgery to repair. I think it was a torn labrum, and he will be out 6 to 8 months from right now. So he's going to miss a good chunk of next season. The first couple of months at least, potentially the whole year if he has a setback or if it takes extra long to recover. So he might not play much at all during his sophomore season, which is a bummer because he was coming along really well in his rookie season. Didn't play much early on, wasn't the flashiest rookie or anything like that, and wasn't getting minutes early on in the season, but found himself, playing himself into the rotation a little bit late in the season, and in the playoffs he was playing good minutes for them, and he had some good possessions defending Giannis in that series. And he was doing, holding his own against the Brooklyn Nets. And so I thought Okongwu had a pretty good playoff run, and unfortunately he's going to have to miss most of next year. So I expect him back with the Hawks. No trade should be in the works for him. He's a good young player. And hopefully he'll be able to make a nice recovery and be back on the court soon. Chris Dunn has a player option for $5 million. He was hurt most of the year, didn't play much. I really liked the signing at the time, but we just haven't seen him much on the court with this team. So I'll give him another year. I expect he'll pick up that option because after the injury season he just had, I doubt he'll get that on the open market. So I expect he'll pick up the $5 million option. It could be a trade piece. You throw that in with another salary. Although, like I said, I don't really know if there's that many other tradable contracts on this roster. Those 3 at the top are potentially tradable, but I would like to hold on to all of those guys. So maybe Chris Dunn by himself, along with Bruno Fernando is really the only other guy that I would consider trading. Can get you something back, or maybe you attach him with picks or something, but for the most part, I'd probably want to try to hold on to him because I did say this last offseason, and I think it still is true. It's a good defensive option to have, whether you want to play him next to Trae Young or sub Trae Young out for him when you really need a defensive stop, because Chris Dunn's calling card is his defense, and Trae Young is not a good defender. So just having Dunn on the roster to be able to bail you out in certain situations, I think makes sense, although, he just hasn't been able to be on the floor. So we'll see on him. I think out of anybody on this roster, he is the one guy that is potentially a trade piece, but really everybody else, I feel like should stay in a Hawks uniform this offseason. Cam Reddish showed some growth over this past year, and he was, had a really big playoff game in that Bucks series, and was really shooting the ball well and showing some flashes for him. So there was a reason he was drafted, top 10 pick, and he was really, really highly regarded coming out of high school, and wasn't that good in college. He kind of not living up to the hype when he was in NCAA, but coming into the draft, he still had that super high potential and that high regard from a lot of people, even though he was coming off a pretty bad year. So maybe things are starting to come together for him. Still only 21 years old. We got to give these guys time, and he just has he's made some progress. Has not been consistent so far in his career, and going into his third season, I think that he's gonna get an expanded role. Hopefully, he can stay on the floor because he did miss a lot of time with injuries as well this year. So hopefully, he's able to stay on the floor and be able to get a more consistent role and really show what he can do. Because, like I said, he was a top 10 pick for a reason. Got a lot of potential, and he was so highly regarded coming out of high school that you got to feel like there's something there for Cam Reddish. So I would expect him back with Atlanta as well in an expanded role, and we'll see what he can do. John Collins is the big one. He is a restricted free agent this offseason, and there's been a lot of rumors about John Collins and a potential extension, going back to last offseason when he was extension eligible and they didn't give it to him, and everybody's like, okay, well, maybe they'll trade him mid-season. Maybe he's going to be a guy that gets moved at the deadline. Maybe he's going to be, potentially just let go when he enters restricted free agency, and we'll see on that so far, but he was not traded. They had a good year. By the time the trade deadline rolled around, the Hawks were kind of on a roll and they didn't really want to shake things up, and so they just kind of kept going with the roster that they had, and I think that's a smart idea. And so, especially after making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and John Collins was good in their playoff run. He wasn't like incredible. He wasn't like the best player on the team. That was obviously Trae Young, but John Collins fit in well to what the Hawks were doing, and he had some nice moments and just was one of the many players on this roster that stepped up for the playoff run that they had. So we'll see if they want to pay him. Everything we've heard is that he and his camp want a max, and the Hawks don't feel like he's worth the max. So we'll see if there becomes sort of a stalemate there and he does end up getting moved to a different team who will offer him that max contract. Is there a team out there with cap space that's going to offer John Collins a max deal in free agency? I don't know. There's teams out there with cap space and not a ton of great free agents on the board. The Hawks can always match, so they might be forced to pay him the max even if they don't want to hold on to him because of the season that they just had and their run to the conference finals, letting a 23-year-old power forward walk who has averaged nearly 20 points a game for his career is probably not a good look, like I said, for a team that's coming off an Eastern Conference Finals appearance. So I would expect him back next year. I think they're going to be forced to pay him the max rookie extension even though they probably don't want to, but at this point I think they have enough flexibility with the players on their roster and their young core has shown enough growth that it's probably okay to just go ahead and max John Collins and see what you can do with the rest of the roster as everybody continues to grow. Kevin Huerter is actually also extension eligible. This is a third member of their young core who is up for an extension this offseason. Now, Huerter is not a max type player, of course, but he is very good and he's very talented, and he's shown a lot of improvement over the course of his career in the NBA, and had some good moments for them in their playoff run as well. So I would expect Huerter to, get a sizable extension this offseason if they do choose to extend him. They may wait until restricted free agency next summer, have him take another year to really prove that this improvement is real. But I do think Huerter's a good player, and he fits well with Trae Young and John Collins and everybody else that they have on this roster, everything else they've got going on. So I do think, my gut tells me Huerter will probably get an extension somewhere around, 15 to 18 million per season, something like that for him. He's a really good player and a good shooter, and guys like that get a decent paycheck now in the NBA. So you might not think Huerter's worth it, but I think he's been really good for them, kind of flying under the radar a little bit. Red Velvet, the Red Mamba, whatever you want to call him, Kayvon, as his teammates would say. So I would expect an extension for Kevin Huerter as well. Then we have Brandon Goodwin, Solomon Hill. Solomon Hill's a good veteran for this team. I think he was valuable for them this year, and not only on the floor but also in the locker room. And I think that if they want him back on another 1-year minimum, I think that would work out well for both sides. Brandon Goodwin, is a guy 25 years old, not super consequential on him. He doesn't get on the court much, to be honest, and I don't really know too much about Brandon Goodwin. So I don't know, maybe another 1-year minimum. He is only 25, so maybe still some room to grow for him, but I don't think that's really the end of the world either way. Couple of other guys down here. Bruno Fernando at 22 years old, young big man, entering the final year of his rookie contract. I don't know. Like I said, when I was talking about Chris Dunn, I think this is really the only other guy on this roster that is potentially like a throw into a trade type guy, but his salary is, less than $2 million, and so you're not really making up a ton by including him anywhere, but he doesn't have a big role on this roster, and kind of lost some of his minutes to Okongwu last year, of course. They kind of have the big man position covered here already, so I don't know how much of a role Fernando can have with the Hawks moving forward. Would not be surprised to see him either traded or potentially cut in camp if they want to free up the roster spot. He's okay, but nothing really super special with him. And then Skylar Mays and Nathan Knight, I think, are both good players to have on two-way contracts. Nathan Knight really showed some flashes, I thought, early on in the season, and Skylar Mays is also a pretty good player. Neither of them got on the floor too much this past year, but I think they're both, like I said, ideal types of players to have on two-way deals. Guys who are, still relatively young, still growing players, but also have the potential to step in and contribute to a game if you need them to. So I would expect them both back, whether that's on the roster or on two-way deals again. I think both of them are good fits for this team. So for the Hawks, I really don't think they need to attempt to make any sort of drastic changes or trades or signings this offseason. They can really kind of just run this roster back and rock out with the same players that got them to the conference finals last year. Now, I don't know if they can necessarily expect to be back in the conference finals. A lot of things had to break their way for them to get there, and there's a lot of really good teams in the Eastern Conference that are going to be healthier next year. But I do think that they're going to be, a perennial, really, really good team in the conference for as long as they can keep this core together. They have a lot of really good players on cheap contracts under 25 years old, and they have a couple more seasons before they really have to start paying everybody. John Collins obviously is going to get his extension, and Trae Young will get his, but it won't kick in until the following year. So they won't be like super duper capped out for a couple more seasons. And at that point, because they have so many good young guys that might get paid a lot of money, then you're kind of looking at a roster crunch, and you might need to make some changes in a couple of years. But for right now, you've got guys on these rookie deals: DeAndre Hunter, Trae Young, Okongwu, Cam Reddish, John Collins presumably on his extension, Kevin Huerter as well. So that's your group right there. Plus, with some nice veterans in Gallinari, Bogdanovic, Capella, there's a reason this team was in the conference finals, right? A lot of good young guys and then veterans to help lead the way. And so we will see if they need to make any moves this offseason. I don't think they do. I think, particularly this year, it's just going to be about re-signing John Collins most likely. That's the biggest worry for them right now, is how much they're going to have to pay him to keep him. Ultimately, like I said, I do think they will end up re-signing John Collins, whether that's on a rookie max or close to it. I think that's just the way that it's trending right now, given the season that they just had. And then other than that, bring Lou Williams back on a minimum, Solomon Hill back on a minimum, potentially trade Chris Dunn if you can. But other than that, I think we're going to see a very similar Hawks roster going into next season, and that's really not, that's not the end of the world, because this team was good last year, and I expect them to be good moving forward. And the other thing to mention is that they do have the 20th pick in the draft. That's the good thing about, kind of having a good playoff run as a lower seeded playoff team, because they were the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference going in, make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they don't have to have a bottom 4 pick in the first round, because the pick order is decided by, your record and your seed at the end of this season. It doesn't take into account the playoffs at all. So they get the 20th pick, and that's a mid-first round choice. Very deep first round class this year. I think they'll get a nice player at number 20. Could that pick be traded? I could see it happening, potentially trading down maybe for some more future picks, or a player that is on a contract right now. You can cobble together Chris Dunn, Bruno Fernando, make up about $7-8 million in salary, and potentially trade for a guy who maybe is on like the 3rd or 4th year of their rookie contract, maybe a little further along, a cast-off guy that another team doesn't want, or a guy like on a mid-level salary, like something like that. So I would not be shocked to see them trade that pick, just because they could find themselves in a bit of a roster crunch, having to, extend and pay like 6 or 7 guys on their rookie contracts within 3 or 4 years, just because they have made so many picks recently, and that gets expensive very, very quickly. So I would not be shocked to see them kind of avoid that problem that might happen in 4 years by trading a pick this offseason. So we'll see on that for the Hawks, but that's a good problem to have, right? Having a ton of good players on rookie deals is it's a good problem in the NBA, but they might want to try to avoid having to pay so much in extensions in a couple of seasons by trading away this year's pick. That's just something to maybe keep an eye on. But I think that's all I have on the Atlanta Hawks and their offseason plans. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Hawks and their offseason. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you are not subscribed already, please consider doing so. It would really help me out a lot. With all that said, I will see you guys in the next one.